All right, we are in it. Let me first apologize for the remarkably annoying little bleep sound that you're going to hear during this conversation, because I am in the office, in our Atlanta office at Edelman, and this is one of the things that we have to now get used to about being back in the office. It's sometimes our technology is not ready to move with us. So my apologies in advance. Welcome. One, two, thank you. I'm always so appreciative that people find the time to do this. And you are not going to be disappointed in this conversation, because I'm talking to a really dear friend that has taught me so much about sustainability, and one of our favorite clients who has taught the team a lot about teamwork and about working on things that are purposeful. So our conversation is going to be building sustainable business models with ESG. And with me, I have my friend CB, who is the chair of sustainability and ethics at the University of Pittsburgh, and my client, Elena, who is the director of Globant's Sustainable Business Studio. So thank you both for joining me. And I would be remiss if I didn't say also that I have the great pleasure of being a member of CB's working group, the Center for Sustainable Business. I'm a strategic counselor to that at the University of Pittsburgh. So thank you both in advance for everything that you are doing to really make sure we're having smart conversations about business, sustainability, purpose, profitability. Let me start by saying that I was in a meeting 2 weeks ago, and it was such an important meeting, and we were talking about ESG. And it was a little apparent to me, but then made even more clear after the meeting that not everybody in the room actually understood the E, the S, and the G. And so I want to level set, because it feels awkward, like to get halfway into it and say, okay, I kind of don't even know what we're talking about, but I do know that it's important. So CB, if I can ask you to talk about the E, the S, the G, and why they are important.
Thank you, Lisa. And thank you for having me here. And nice to be with you, Elena. So the E, the S, and the G. So the E stands for environment. So as we now, most of us know by now that there is global warming, carbon emissions, climate change, biodiversity loss, all of these kinds of things. So the environment is a big part of how we live, how we survive, how we exist. And the idea is, by now we know that we are kind of, in some sense, losing out to the environment in this battle, and therefore we have to steer our ship right, and that's why that's important. Mm-hmm. S stands for social. The S stands for social. So what's going on in your community? Is there unrest in your community, or where you're operating your mine? Is there slave labor in your supply chain? Human rights abuses? All these kinds of things are equally important for sustainability, because God made us in his or her image. So we are all the same. So we should not have human rights abuses or anything like that in the operations of companies. That's why the S is important. And the G stands for governance. So how do we run our operations? So who is on our board? Are there women on our board? These things are important, because research has shown that gender diversity on the board actually helps the firm operate better. Are we accused of bribery charges? Is there corruption? All of these kinds of the governance that also has kind of an impact on how well the firm is actually run. So any firm needs to take care of the environment, because it's operating in that environment. It needs to take care of societal issues, because it operates in society. And it needs to take care of its governance, because that's what makes sure that overall it is running as a smooth operation. So that's why these three go together. And it has now been established that it's not enough to look at financial reports alone, to look at profitability alone. You need to look at how firms are doing on these three criteria of E, S, and G to get a holistic view of how business operates. That's it.
That is might be the most comprehensive and clear description of ESG that I've heard in a while. And Elena, before I ask you about the movement of ESG, my observation in response to what you said, CB, I feel very acutely now. We had the opportunity to meet with some members of our Edelman team yesterday, and they talked about the confluence of societal issues, the environment, and governance, and reminded us that societal issues are incredibly important, but climate and the environmental piece is so directly related. And it's an important component that we have to keep driving very, very, very clearly on. And so it's something that I'm feeling very acutely right now. And that's why your description of it is so remarkably clear. Now, Elena, what's interesting to me is 7 years ago, you heard about ESG. 5 years ago, people started talking more about ESG. Now, you can't have a conversation in business, global business, unless you talk about ESG. What happened? How did we get to this point? I think many of us are grateful for it, but how did it go from a sounds good, that's cool, to a must have?
Well, first of all, very nice being here. And I think that this conversation is so timely and so vibrant that I'm absolutely thrilled to participate to it and to try to add some points of view to it as well. In respect to what you're saying, Lisa, I think that great concepts deserve this type of development. And throughout their history, from when they were creating to the position that they have today, as you said, very central in every business and every organization. So this initial concept of ESG that dates back to Kofi Annan, 2004, 2005, and a Global Compact report, which I think had a great title, which is that of "Who Cares Wins," which I think it's a great slogan for today's business. If we care, we win. If we don't care, the chance of being stranded is really high. So back in 2005, it started out by pointing that ESG, i.e. environment, society, and governance, had a financial relevance. So it was basically convincing the financial world that these three issues were relevant for financial success. And I think that today it is, of course, the same. I mean, we all know that those three concepts are very central, very core in every decision that we take if we want to have a positive financial and business impact. But at the same time, it is the finance world which is impacted by them, because we know that today we have supply chains and value chains that, if we do not look carefully at the environmental risk that we're facing in certain regions of the world, will be dramatically impacted by the changes in extreme weather events. I mean, you can think about the energy industry, but many industries and many supply chains can be dramatically impacted by that. So it has evolved. And it has had a great fortune, I think, and it really deserves this position because of the way it was thought at the beginning. Somebody at the beginning, a group of people, a team, thought that ESG were financially relevant. And today, we're very glad that this has only been augmented in its relevance and importance. And I think that today, even if not everybody has it as a central of its culture and strategy in terms of firms and organizations, we're getting there.
Yeah, I love everything that you said. I don't know that everyone is there, which is why I think this conversation is so incredibly important. And so I think a goal of this, because we always like to walk out of these with really relevant conversation and really tips for people, is what are the things that we can do to make sure that those people who are talking about it take it to the next level, and those people who are not talking about it know that they need to. So that makes me think about, so what does ESG look like in 2022? So we've gotten to this point, but what does it look like in 2022, and what does it look like in 2030? CB?
Yeah, sure. Let me just add a fun fact to what Elena said. So even though Kofi Annan actually is credited with indeed coining, or his team, the ESG phrase itself, the idea that these kinds of metrics can matter in financial decisions actually goes back to 1890, when the Quaker Friends fiduciary actually had sin stocks that they would eliminate from any portfolio that they would look at. So the idea of kind of, environmental performance or social performance, the fact that they can kind of, play a role in financial markets is goes back, 1 century. But to come to now, fast forward, so today there are like more than 60 exchanges worldwide that, stock exchanges that kind of have ESG impetus kind of built into it. And come to 2022, I'll leave the 2030 to Elena, but come 2022, I just want to point out maybe 3 things that I think we are going to see a lot more on. So one thing that we are going to see is a lot more emphasis on standardization, because right now ESG, again, to go back to your stage setting, I mean, is quite all over the map. I mean, so there are kind of 600 ratings and rankings and different firms offering different metrics and KPIs and so on and so forth. So the EU has moved quite strongly with something called the Sustainability Disclosures Regulation, and they are trying to standardize essentially how firms can be compared with one another, what should be in that kind of disclosure report. So we will see much more interest in standardization and comparison, because that's going to be driving firms' strategies and performance. The second thing we're going to see, I think, is a greater emphasis on the natural capital of the world. So nature, the World Economic Forum just published something that said that nature and nature-related things contribute somehow to half the world's GDP. $44 trillion of economic value is somehow moderately or highly dependent on nature. I mean, think about growing crops to everything else. And so we're going to see companies being taken to task more seriously in terms of kind of how do your activities impact nature, and what are you doing about it? Definitely, we're going to see this right away. And the third thing we are going to see is more emphasis as well on the S. So thanks to Black Lives Matter, George Floyd, everything else that you and I have spoken of, last year. So we are going to definitely see more action kind of on the diversity, equity, and inclusion front as far as companies are concerned in 2022, and definitely kind of going forward. So let me stop here, and Elena can add something.
Okay. So you've given me the task of predicting the near future to 2030
scenario.
I think that, again, the United Nations helping us in that by setting this decade as the decade of action. I think that this concept is really beautiful in its boldness and in its pragmatical viewpoint. We need to be very practical. We need to take actions on the 3 issues of ESG. And of course, I have a little bit of a struggle today by separating ESG, climate change, and sustainability. I have to say that working within this environment, the 3 concepts somehow always touch each other. So I think that the decade of action will all be about how we bring actionable points on these 3 matters all together to a concrete advancement. So 2030 will be the year in which we have to have had a certain carbon budget not surpassed if we want to keep the temperature below 1.5 or 2 degrees in respect to pre-industrial levels. And let me say that I think that the E and S are possibly today somehow strongly actionable. We know what we can do in society. We know what we know what we should be doing, and we know what we can do through technology and science-based objectives for the E. I still struggle sometimes in thinking that the G, especially, I don't know, CB, if you agree with me, but I do not only see it at the board level or at the uppermost management level. I think that the governance issue on environment and society, it's embedded in the business at every level of the business and of the organization. So that's where I think that we really need to focus at the moment to make sure that ESG, sustainability and climate, if you allow me, all together, need to be very present at every step of the decision-making process. If they're not there from the start, which is somehow, you were mentioning the European Union with the new taxonomy, they're trying to force us to do that. We need to be thinking ahead of what is going to be the process that we are starting in terms of ESG, climate, and sustainability. So get your acts together, all of us. up front, and do not find yourself in a bad position in 2030. Do it now and act internally and put into force that governance that allows your company to have all these subjects at the heart of your decision-making process.
Because neither of you have hesitated to predict the future, I'll ask you then to talk about COP26, beginning at the end of this month. What is for those of us who care deeply about these issues and the intersection of these issues, the way you have described them and the responsibility of these issues, what is the best case scenario for outcomes for COP26?
Who goes first? That's a fascinating question.
Ladies. Okay, you go first this time.
CB's buying time, Elena, by telling you to go first.
Let me just say that I'm so thrilled. We're going to be at the COP26. So I'm very happy that we will be participating in person to such an important event. To be very honest, I thought that before this energy crisis, the COP26 was bound to be successful in respect to carbon pricing, carbon taxation, the whole of what I tend to call carbon thinking. Carbon thinking, I thought that the COP26, because of Mark Carney, because of Bloomberg, because of many of the United Nations now special envoys that have such a strong history in terms of climate action, risk assessment. I mean, they've been really into it and they're role models to that. I thought that it was bound to be very successful. I still, of course, very much hope so. I still very much hope that we will get all familiarized with CO2 and pricing and what that has as an impact, what can have as impact in our net present values of every project that we're looking at. At the same time, we have to face that the energetic crisis is coming in the way and that we probably were not ready for this strong transition or sudden transition, like the Bank of England or Mark Carney had stated at the beginning, that we have a risk in transitioning to a low carbon economy that we need to take into account. Possibly that risk at this point has played it as a major role. So it is not going to be easy to overturn what we're living at the moment, but it's turmoil, it's complicated, may not be straightforward, but still a lot of effort can be done in having this COP linked to a price to CO2, or at least a very in-depth discussion in respect to that. So that's at least.
What do you want to see? No, that's ambitious and clear. CB, what do you want to see come out of it? How do we win this?
I think we win this by making an appeal that all hands be on deck for the problem. So, it is being seen as a us versus them kind of a situation. Okay, so that's governments fighting governments, saying, okay, it's not my problem, it's your problem. You went with that CO2. I think what we need is parties to be able to come together in some kind of a unified way, saying it's not about us or you or whatever, it's about humanity. It's about our species together. And for that, we not only need governmental support, we need support from every stakeholder possible. So companies will need to step up. And if companies come out of COP, with a fire kind of, with their feet tied to the fire saying you've got to get this done, I would be very, very happy if there is urgency kind of behind them. And because ultimately the company also cannot do anything by itself. We're talking about the E, the S, and the G, but a company is made out of people. Ultimately, a company is made of people. So unless we can embed sustainability, ESG, whatever term you use, into companies, to large companies that have hundreds of thousands of people working for them across the globe, and everybody takes individual responsibility for sustainability. Ownership is the word I like to use. If we don't have that, then we will continue to, again, miss the boat, I think. So I think we really need an approach also that's inclusive, and that includes climate communication, because a lot of people don't understand what's going on. I mean, why should I bother? Is it too late? All of this I hear. So Elena, looks like
your concept, what both of you have talked about, is the human aspect of it. Like, this is not some ethereal, theoretical thing. This is something that we are all impacted by. And this concept of each of us understanding our role and taking our responsibility seriously and actively engaging is certainly will be one of my takeaways. CB, one of the many gifts that you have given me, besides really enlightening me and getting me closer to this really important issue, but you gave me a copy of your book, Small Actions, Big Difference, Leveraging Corporate Sustainability to Drive Business and Societal Value, which is almost exactly what Elena talked about. What was the inspiration behind that book? And do you feel that by writing it, what have you been able to do to advance the cause?
Thank you, Lisa, for giving me that opportunity. The book really came out of the observation that everybody thinks that sustainability, the well-being of our planet and its people, is someone else's problem, right? So small companies think, so I started with executive education students, and I would teach these students, they were from companies, big companies, and I would ask them about sustainability, and it's like, oh, that's important, but we have people taking care of that. I got to meet my targets. I mean, that's much more important for me. So the idea was that sustainability is kind of just relegated to this one department in an organization and does not have a seat at the strategy table. And to me, that was a terrible disconnect. So the idea was, how can we invigorate the entire organization to kind of take up this cause, to take up this responsibility, because it's as much my planet as it is yours. So the inspiration for the book was really to how do we make it everybody's problem rather than everybody saying that it's someone else's problem. And to that point, so I don't know if I'm doing a good job, but there is Small Actions, Big Difference. Please do take a look at the book, because it talks about how do you engage the entire organization from procurement to disposal, so and that cannot be done by one department. So the book kind of unfolds a model for how to get that done.
So there's a theme here, and that is active engagement by everyone. This is not somebody else's issue. This is not somebody else's problem. Elena, I think it's been a year, maybe 8 months since the launch of Globant's Sustainable Business Studio. In the realm of everybody has a role to play in their active things. Talk a little bit more about what the mission of the studio is. How has it helped business so far? And what do you see as the future of it?
The studio was, first of all, I have to say, a great opportunity in which we could actually twin digitalization and sustainability. So I think that the power of that is the scale. So if you have the content and you have a technological tool as lean as digitalization, for example, that really helps triggering, accelerating, and bringing to scale solutions to the problems that you may decide to face. What we've done so far, we've proposed services, general services to companies, but what we're doing at the moment is partnering up and accompanying the ecosystem of our business portfolio to advance in sustainability. So we take on board through technology everything, in the sense that we do not judge what is your maturity level of sustainability. We try to design end-to-end technology that is appropriate for you in terms of advancing sustainability. So I think that has been a great fortune, a lot of work, but really a great opportunity to twin the two. Again, the European Union calls this the twin transition, sustainability together with digitalization, so that we do not have to do this journey twice. We just do it once, we save time, energy, resources, and we advance all together in that respect. So there's many tools from technology that can actually help that. If I can mention one, or maybe two, because one refers to CB book. I think we took his title without knowing, and now, of course, we're going to acknowledge him, which is that in our process of green IT, we say that every little action counts in terms of greening the next bite. So we're trying to be as green as possible in designing our technology, and that means basically having key performance indicators in terms of energy efficiency. If we save energy, we're directly doing a curbing of emissions. So we try to save energy in our processes of artificial intelligence, algorithm, application design, everything in terms of digitalization and technology, so that we can actually save some energy, hence carb emissions. So this is on one side. And the other thing that I'm really thankful technology for is that technology brings clarity. We need to map our processes. If we want to know where we are today as a company that it's starting its sustainability journey, we need to diagnose and map where we are. So if we have a mapping tool, a platform that then can maybe become a digital carbon twin, because it helps me not only mapping my process, but associating a CO2 budget to that process, I think we're all in business. I think that we can all track our CO2 budget, which today is as relevant as our financial budget. So tracking tools through technology really save us a lot of time and shed a lot of clarity on where we are and where we want to be by 2030 or 2040 or 2050.
Elena, you talk about clarity very clearly, but you also, when you have talked about companies' roles in terms of becoming more sustainable, then you also say they have to include cultural transformation. What do you mean by that?
Okay, I don't want to repeat a very well-known concept, which is culture, it's strategy for breakfast, but maybe we can take it one step farther, which is once something is in your culture, which means that you feel the belonging to that culture, because I think that what CB mentioned as ownership, we can also translate it in terms of belonging. We feel we belong to that decision. We own it because we share it. I mean, we really believe in it as much as I think we share this conversation in a very authentic way. At the same time, if that becomes your culture, then by default, it will be part of your strategy. So if I manage to have those values embedded in my culture, in my decision-making processes, my strategies will automatically cascade out from it. It becomes more of my DNA than mine, and automatically drives my strategy, I think.
And I just want to add one thing, that this is all driven by a sense of purpose. Mm-hmm. Every business needs a sense of purpose. Why do we do what we do? If we cannot answer that question, your culture is not going to be where you want it to be. Your strategy is not going to be where it wants. So that's the North Star. And to the student who is looking to launch a career, find purposeful companies. If you work for a company with a purpose, you will have more success doing ESG there than a company that has not bought into it. Now, I do have some messages for companies that have not bought into it yet. I know that.
So, CB, talk about that, because that was my big question for you. But I was afraid your head would explode if I asked you. But like, let's be for real. Some companies haven't bought into it, which is why I wanted to start with like a clear definition of it. So, what is the fate of those companies that haven't bought into it? And to be balanced and fair, why haven't they?
I mean, in short, their fate is not very good. I think they're not going to survive for very long because regulation is coming down the pipe. Stakeholders are demanding non-financial disclosure, investors. So all of that, I mean, so it's going to be very difficult for those companies. Why haven't they done it? Myopia. There's no other reason. It's just myopia. It's basically the idea of living in the moment. I mean, why do people go out and eat and drink like there's no tomorrow at the cost of health, at their own health? It's short-sightedness, plain and simple, and an inability to understand what life is about. I mean, I'm realizing that more and more. Still holding money above, profits above purpose, and unless that changes, unless we understand that business belongs to society, not the other way around. And business is there to provide a societal benefit and nothing more. I don't think we will win this battle unless we get that philosophy right first.
The last word on this, because both of you, one, thank you from the bottom of my heart as a business person, but just also as a citizen of the world, for the conversations that you're leading, the transformation that you are engineering, and the warnings that you are giving to people who don't get it. A recurring theme is what we as individuals can do. So if I can, Elena, ask you to start in our last minute, 2 things that everyone listening can do to keep this going. Then CB, I want to give you the last word.
I think that apart from practical actions, that could be obviously walking more than driving, but I think that the important point here is that we talk about it, we communicate correctly on the science, the technology, the advancement of all this in a very transparent and very bold and convinced way. So keeping up on the conversation, and thanks a lot, Lisa, for what you're doing.
CB?
I will just say that we don't inherit the earth from our parents, we borrow it from our children. So let's think about what the future generations are going to do if we don't act now. And that should be impetus enough.
This is my inspiration for the week. This is the direction and clarity and some really tangible counsel and advice. I can't thank the two of you enough. For those people who are able to join us, thank you always for finding the time to do it. I hope you walked away with something. And you're right, CB, this is borrowed. It's a gift and we have to take care of it. Thank you all, and I'll see you soon.
Grazie. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Very nice.